leaders and experts into that field that happens to take this member here and provide the khutbah every third Friday of the week or something like that. So that is essentially your regular flavor geography. So what is sacred? Why would you be interested in something that is called sacred geography? Now, when the Muslims introduced their spin on teaching geography, these are the fundamental assumptions that they have used to create the science. So first, they created this concept that is called al-haram in their geography. So there is something that is called the sacred space, and the term haram here simply in Islamic jurisprudence means that it is a space that no one can violate. And it has to sit at the center of the spiritual life of the space that Muslims consider to be something that you can never violate or transgress against. Like, this is the reason for which this thing here used to be, what was it, like a preschool or pre-K, or what was the building before? Pre-something? Preschool? It used to be preschool. Now, you can buy it as a preschool. But now that you sacralize it and you make it into a masjid, the idea of reselling the masjid for another purpose now is going to become a very serious headache. Because the short answer in Islamic law is you can't do that anymore. So it's a one-way street. So sacralizing a space geographically in Islamic terms is a very, very, very big deal. It's a very big deal. It's a huge idea. That is not something to be played with or tempered with at all. Then the orientation of geography in Islam is not north, it's the Qibla, which is a defining feature of how you basically organize your direction of the sacred towards this Qibla that came out of a very serious fight and a very serious distress that the Prophet ﷺ has gone through until he was granted his wish for his Qibla to be redirected to what he preferred, and instead of facing north from where he was towards Al-Quds, he ended up facing directly to Mecca, and so that became then a reorientation of the entire sacred community towards a point of interest. The third one is an extremely important idea that some of you might or might not have heard about, and that's okay if you haven't heard about it before. But there are classical books in Islam that speak about the way that the geography of Islam is organized. For example, Baghdad in the 2nd century of the Hijrah, when it was rebuilt around the new Islamic principles, it was built as a circular city, not as a Cartesian Manhattan-like city that would come from Greek or Roman heritage. Or Byzantium was also organized in that particular way. So you don't put basically some sort of senate or some sort of pantheon into a particular direction, and then you run the primary arteries in urban planning that start from the focal point, and they either fan out or they fan parallel to one another. Fanning out is the way that Berlin and Paris are built, the way that Washington, D.C. in the United States is built. Parallel Cartesian is the way Manhattan is built and the way all of the West Coast is built. So after we finished basically making all of the mistakes we made in the East Coast, and we learned in the United States to not make the same mistakes, starting from west of the Mississippi River with the rebuilding of Chicago, then the urban planning started to go Cartesian all the way out to the West Coast. And that's why you find that most of the cities in the United States are very much Cartesian in thing, with the exception of the big DC, because DC was specifically built as a state capital that was modeled after Paris. And if you go at the back of the White House, there is something called Lafayette Place, and Lafayette was directly connected to the urban planners of Paris, and they are the ones that were responsible for inspiring the building of the model in this. However, in the way that Baghdad was done, it was done concentric. So you do a circle that runs from the inside to the outside. And one of the very interesting things about that permeated all of the Muslim world is this idea of you always have the cities that are built in a manner that is wedged, that would point to Mecca. So the Meccan orientation will always allow you to have that work in there. So we basically have an architecture in terms of geography that is pie-shaped wherever you go and whichever direction you go in. And finally, and this is really, really important, we have never had in Muslim history an orientation that is cartographical. It has always been spiritual in our particular direction on how we prioritize the direction of the Qibla as opposed to everything else. Obviously today, with most of you who are using these crazy apps and using the GPS or the towers to calculate the position on Mecca direct from there, your Qibla is the global positioning satellite that is sitting up there. It's no longer this stuff, but we'll forgive you this because it's the times have changed. So we have to kind of go with ease and do something that is different. Now, Muslim geographers have impacted the science of sacred geography by doing always what the Muslims have done, which is to put an incredible magic blend between being rigorous with the science, but at the same time bringing a balance of the spiritual in it in a manner that is exactly aligned with what the dictates of Tawheed of Islam would require. So the first one, who you all know, the term algorithm in English comes from him, a mathematician, algebra specifically was his specialty, who has worked in this. One of the amazing things that you might not know about is he actually revolutionized in something that is called, this book that's called Kitab Surat al-Ard, which is an interesting way in which he has applied his mathematical, primarily algebraic and geometric understanding to work sort of the coordinates of the Mediterranean, and he wasn't living close enough to the Mediterranean to know this. He did it through calculations to have a better sense of understanding the world that he didn't see that could be calculated in a better way. Al-Mas'udi, 10th century, one of the most prominent, which is the book that most Muslims who are serious about the history of geography go back to, is Al-Idrisi, a 12th century scholar who has done significant work have you actually seen the maps of Al-Idrisi? Did anybody see them in the audience? It's absolutely hilarious. If you take his maps, the south is north and the north is south, so he has the maps reversed. It's one of the things that he has introduced in that. And if you see them, it's funny because I remember that the first time I stumbled on them many, many years ago, I was trying to hold it like this and turn my head down to figure out how in God's name do you understand that for the way that he was doing. And the reason for which he did that, for that particular orientation, is because in his positioning, sort of north and magnetic north were not the interesting ways to go with. The interesting point that is the center of the world is actually a concentric argument, and Mecca is the epicenter of the world that work in that. Now, Piri Reis, who's an Ottoman admiral who went in and did his cartography, that now becomes more into the tradition of Europeans, where you basically start sailing, and as you start sailing, you pick up the topology of the terrain, and you draw the topology of the terrain in real time, and you update the maps, much like what the Dutch did, much like what the French did, what the Spaniards did, and all of the big what the Brits did for mapping Cape Horn and going all around southern Argentina and Chile and southern Africa. So that's how all of these were mapped and done by literally people looking outside using instruments and mapping point by point by point by point until you do the equivalent of a geological survey by mapping exactly the topology and the contour of the terrain. The important thing here is to notice that the Muslims, in their sacred tradition, connecting back to where they were not students, they were players that actually moved the field of geography by taking the sciences of the day, algebra, cartography, measurements and whatnot, without forgetting their spiritual dimension and the understanding of the centrality of the sacred Mecca inside it and whatnot. So why is that? Is because We have always had in Islam a theory of knowledge which generally maps to the general theory of knowledge, but ours is very specific. We begin in the ground floor and we use the natural sciences, and in the technical parlance of Sharia, we call this fard kifaya. If some of us in the community develop the skills to become experts and lead into the sciences, the obligation for the rest of us drops. We don't all have to become civil engineers. We don't all have to become mechanical engineers. We don't all have to become medical doctors. We don't all have to become lawyers. It's sufficient that the needs of the community are taken care of by some who acquire the skill, develop the skill, lead the skill, and become exceptionally good at delivering that service for the Muslim community. That's the ground floor. If we don't have that, we become the laughingstock of nations because we basically have no core competencies. And that's exactly why we ended up colonized by everywhere else. And if you go to the history of colonization, if it wasn't done by brute force, usually a Muslim polity, the case of, say, for example, Egypt, would go out and hire a banker, hire some consultants, and then the bankers and the consultants will own you. And after they own you, they will bring their armies. And after they bring their armies, they will take over your country. And then you go down the toilet, and then it goes pretty bad from there. Why? It's because people did not invest in the core skills that were happening. When the Mongols saw for the first time the printing press arrive to India, they said, "A'udhu billah, what is this kufr? Like, take away this from us, we don't want to see this." I have teachers when I was in North Africa who told me, because they had generations of people that came before them, that they had elders, when the first time a radio broadcast took place in their community, they had to read the Mu'awwadatayn for fear that some jinn is inhabiting the space for that. And that's why we ended up being the laughingstock of people around us, because this entry point here was neglected. Above it is the effort. That's where 99% of the effort of the corpus of work of the Muslims have gone. This is why we have an Imam Bukhari, this is why we have a Tirmidhi, this is why we have the compilations of the Quran, this is why we have the tafsir, we have to, because we excel at al-ilm al-naqli. We love the idea of taking basically a form of static knowledge, and we try to transmit it authentically from one generation to the other as we do that. I'm not belittling that work. It's very, very important work, because if we lose the authenticity of that knowledge, then from a data science perspective, we lost the integrity of the data. Then everything that comes after that cannot be trusted, because obviously if you cannot tell the difference between a hadith that is mawdu' and a hadith that is sahih, that's a catastrophe, that's a disaster. So we needed that. So that is what typically is called the field of epistemology, is the field that deals with that. Then the next layer demands very serious engagement, because it's no longer about what did I hear and how am I passing it on. Now it becomes, what does it mean? What does that mean? What I heard, what does it mean? What do I do with it? That's a little bit more serious. So that's the field where metaphysics, and alhamdulillah we had the layer, primarily the reason for which I am absolutely in love with the Persians and their contribution, that has been their contribution to the Muslim Ummah, by having taken the two first layers and they take them up. So if you're going to go to Ibn Sina, if you're going to go to all of the people that have really advanced the metaphysics, the philosophy, the incredible work that they have contributed, is what allowed us to get to levels that otherwise we would not have gotten to. The two things that sometimes get a little controversial, because they get into the world of soft sciences, and that is the spiritual and intuitive knowledge, and the highest level of knowledge in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and ta'bud Allah ka'annaka tarah, fa in lam tarahu fa innahu yarak. And there are all kinds of interpretations about what that hadith means and what it means to attain the level of ihsan in religion. So some people have gone completely high wire with bid'ah and all kinds of sciences that are occult and have no meaning at all, and others have done some tremendous job. That's the territory that is inhabited by people like Al-Ghazali and others who have done some amazing work in that field. But this notion of the hierarchy of knowledge basically applies to everything. And it's quite important for the Muslims to realize that we do okay at the bottom. Usually we don't drive the bus, we just go copy somebody else. Right? That's a huge problem. We do amazing for the second layer. That's really our field, that's our terrain. So nobody in any other religious tradition has the layer that we have in the second layer. We cannot do poorly on the third one. A lot of people have slept at the wheel from medieval times and medieval philosophy. Everybody checked out and they just hang their shoes, and we haven't done a lot of work in the third layer. And the fourth and fifth layer are controversial, so that's a topic for another day. I have every intent to one of these days, inshallah, I will teach this topic with rigor and more involvement. So I'm not going to touch it now because it's a little bit toxic.
Dr. Landoni, if I may,
yes.
take the liberty of interrupting you.
Yeah.
Can you at least give us an example of number 4?
Yeah. What did I do? I can't even point to the arrows. Okay. So, generally speaking, in this hierarchy of knowledge, there are the sciences that are meant to deal with what is called the aqidah. And the aqidah are doctrinal sciences, the purpose of which is to anchor us into the fundamental starting point so we don't get misguided and we stay on the track of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. But the aqidah has to do with the understanding of Tawheed from a doctrinal and belief standpoint. Once you have it, you have the orientation. Now you are a vector that is not pointing into the right direction. So what do you need to get your direction to point you in the right place? The next layer that comes on top of this is called the Sharia. The Sharia is basically the combination of the traffic laws that are going to make sure that you stay on the road, you don't crash to the right, you don't crash to the left, and you're going to make it to your destination, which is a taqwa and al-Jannah. So it's going to take all of the dictates of how life is lived, and there will be things that are related to your relationship with Allah, things that are related to your relationship with other human beings, things that are related to your relationship with your environment, things that are related to your relationship with your leaders and your government, and things that are related to your leadership of all of the things that are called transactional. All of this is packaged usually in Sharia in two great categories. One category is called al-ibadat, which are the act of worship. The other category is called al-mu'amalat, which are all the transactional elements. So that's the second element that comes into it. These two are empty if they don't have the third leg. So the third leg that is required to have that is called al-akhlaq, which is to package these two, and you end up being somebody that is like acting like a bull in a china shop and you break everything around it, then we don't need you in our community. You have to have your adab, you have to have your akhlaq. So all of these things are required to do that. Okay. But all of these things that deal with you as human beings, they do not deal with your internal state, which is called the ilm al-hal, the science of the states. In which states are you in? So when you enter to act upon these three things, what are you bringing to the table? Are you bringing a nafs that is commanding? Are you bringing a nafs that is a sinner? Or are you bringing a nafs that is mutma'inna, in a state of complete tranquility and maturity and development? So the sciences of the nafs, the sciences of the hal, are the sciences that this fourth category defines. Make sense? And people like Imam al-Ghazali and others have dealt with it, sometimes referred to as a tarbiyah ruhiyya, sometimes referred to as a tazkiyah. And as I said, this is a topic, so it needs to be a topic by itself. We'll talk about it inshallah, and one day we will have a dedicated lesson or series about it to do that. And I'm incredibly grateful you asked the question. I'm sorry I can interrupt all of this as a bridge, and I should have paid attention. Thank you for calling me on it. I really appreciate it. May Allah bless you, inshallah. Actually, I like what Brother Mihidin said, did right now. I think it might be much better if we did it interactively, so I don't feel like I'm having a monologue here.
Can I ask a follow-up?
So what I suggest you do is ask all the way through, so it becomes more useful. So I'm serving much better. Please.
Two things. He understood it. I didn't get it, to be honest.
Okay. Which part?
Okay.
I was going to ask if you might want to try to kind of reinstate it, and then maybe you could validate it.
Okay, the way I understood is having traversed the first three steps,
Right.
what are we bringing to the table? That's what is defining number 4. And Atlu alayhim ayatim wa yuzakkihim. So he used the word tazkiyah, and he also used the word the tarbiyah of the ruh. So basically, all this material knowledge, is it going towards making me a better human being or not? That's what I understood. Correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Lavin.
No, you're correct. Yeah. Go ahead.
That's basically it.
How is that different from, let's say, I guess, the second one in that sense?
Okay, so the reason for which is different from the second one from the bottom, you're counting,
Yes.
right? So the one of the second one from the bottom, think about it as being in the following way, right? So the transmission of the religious science is the primary fundamental thing behind it. So this is a hierarchy of knowledge. This is about accumulated knowledge, right? So the mission of the second layer is for you to be a link in the chain where the primary responsibility that you have is the custody of the data. Have you received correct data? Are you transmitting correct data? That's your fundamental responsibility in the second layer. Does this make sense? That's fundamentally what your primary responsibility in the second layer. So when people went on, for example, when the crisis of the hadith had started in the 9th century, and out of a sudden people were tossing left and right, and I think at some point where the accumulation, does anybody remember the number? We went up to about like 14,000 or 18,000 hadiths started to circulate, the core of which that are primarily sahih are in the number of about 4,500 to 6,000. So there is this drowning effect where the authentic transmission of the tradition of the Prophet ﷺ was being drowned by 4 things. Straight out falsification. People just lied, like straight out falsification. The second one is manipulation, where somebody will start with a core of truth and will embellish it and add things around it to manipulate that. Third one was political exploitation of the hadith. Imam al-Bukhari was literally put through hell on earth on this exact point, where because he had some challenges in which he denounced a number of groupings and people around him at that particular time, it ended up being into a political climate that caused all kinds of things. And the last ones were ended up, which is this whole thing that Imam Ahmad bin Muhammad and others went in Khalq al-Quran, for the creation of the Quran, etc., where it ended up where a muhaddith was taken down a theological rat hole and essentially punished in Inquisition, punished and tortured and all of that, because what happened is that the sciences of the, and the fifth category, the last one, I was doing the math in my head and I forgot the fifth one, which is the introduction of falsified hadith for a good reason. Not for a bad reason, for a good reason. So when, for example, the Sahaba in the 9th century became a target of a lot of things that either would insult or demean them or things like that, people in the love of the Sahaba or in being in defense of the Sahaba started to put falsified hadiths in order to protect the Sahaba against the calumnies and things like that. So it doesn't change the outcome. The outcome is you can't fix the right with something wrong. So the outcome still is wrong and is not acceptable. So that second layer is what today we owe all of our authenticity and respect to. Had we not had that second layer, it'll be a disaster. And it's interesting that it never ends, right? When was Imam al-Albani doing this work? Like 30, 40 years ago. So it never ends. So you constantly are working on this, authenticating this particular heritage in order to get that going. So that's what that science is. Make sense? Okay. I'll give you a cheat sheet. It's not factually true, but I'll give you a cheat sheet. The fourth layer, do you know the science today in psychology that's called personal development? It's a little bit that idea. It's a cheat sheet. Don't map to it 100%, but it's a little bit that idea. It's a domain of personal development in a sacred way. Yes, Brother Yusuf.
I think according to number 4, as just transmitted religious knowledge takes the spirit of research and thinking, tafakkur and tadabbur out of this category. It just looks like it is just transmitted and then you follow it. So I would suggest to change its name from just transmitted to something else.
Just to, sorry to interrupt, but just to add to that, I was thinking a little bit along those similar lines, and I had a question, and I was wondering whether the fourth layer, or the second from the bottom, to get to that, whether the scholars utilize, I would say, the frameworks, which perhaps you can call the third layer, to essentially distill that knowledge to get to that level. And then I would say the second level from the top is perhaps what I think the famous poet Iqbal says, Hudi, which is the concept of
Right.
prayer. So would that be a correct interpretation of?
It's very close. So I do respect Brother Muhammad Yusuf's opinion with regard to the second layer, perhaps having been a little bit shortchanged for taking it down primarily into a courier function that takes a message from one place to the other. But Brother Yusuf, just for the record, it's not my wording. They call themselves al-ilm al-naqli. They call themselves naql. I didn't invent that word. It's the way they describe how they do. So they say we are fundamentally, the reason for which we retain authenticity is because we don't allow a ra'i to have an opinion on anything we do. We are primarily about naql. So I am not the person responsible for shortchanging this. Just for the record, just be clear on how I do that. That's why I went into that direction. So it's and you are absolutely right. Imam al-Shafi'i's Risala, it's a piece of genius because he synthesized Islamic law into a new framework. That's the point that you are making. So that's not directly naqli, but if the difference between, say, the analysis of the way that Imam al-Tabari writes history or Imam Ibn Kathir writes history, they don't say that we are historians that do forensic history or analysis of histories. We are naqliyin. We take it as is and we transmit it next. I'm not using that language, they used it. Right? So that's the point I was trying to make. Now when it comes later on to Imam Ibn al-Qayyim, now Imam Ibn al-Qayyim is going to move us all the way out to the fourth layer, the one just before the top one. Because now he's going to take those sciences and he's going to take them to a whole other level of interpretation on how you do personal development using that work. So that's the point that you are making on how Iqbal spoke about this. But again, the thing with everything that we teach that you have to always be very careful with is that essentially, what's the word I'm looking for? All models are models. They are not perfection. They are not a reflection of reality. A model is a model is a model. By definition, it simplifies something in order to take something incredibly complex and put it into something that is packaged for transmission. The model becomes reductive. So you do lose a little bit of the reality in representing it into the simplification of the model that is in question. My only point about putting this here was not to turn tonight's lecture into a lecture about the hierarchy of knowledge. That was not my intent. It was to situate sacred geography, and believe it or not, we are at 8:22 and we haven't spoken about it at all, is to situate sacred geography into the context of the hierarchy of knowledge. And the sacred geography that we are talking about, as opposed to the regular geography that we are going to talk about, sacred geography is going to draw from all of these. That's kind of the key point that I was evolving towards as we come into that. So why do we need that? Brother Muhyiddin, when do we stop?
Technically, 8:45 is our Isha.
Yeah.
But I think that we can go up.
25.
Because the topic is so spellbinding, I would say.
Two more minutes?
No, 20 more minutes.
Or go to 2. Why don't I do 7? I go to 8:30. Would that be fair? 8:30, inshallah. Yeah, barakallahu fikum. Okay, so let's do that. So let me just pause here for a second. Because the next slide that I put in, if there is anything that you need to remember from the lecture that we're going to talk about tonight, is this next slide. I didn't put it in yet, so I don't want your eyes to be there. I want your eyes to be on me, so I can put the fear of God in your hearts, and then we can talk about how to answer it. How's that? Okay? I've been watching this train wreck for a number of years, and it's scaring the daylight out of me. The systemic destruction of the Palestinian through the genocidal program, or now the Iranians through the new genocidal program, or all of these, are directed at the idea of destroying those communities and those societies materially, effectively making them failed states. Syria, Somalia, you end up with Yemen, so you end up with failed states. But I think that there is a more insidious and more terrifying crime and agenda that is infinitely more horrible than all of this put together. And it has a name in English. That's what it is called. It's called epistemicide. It's a very fancy term that means something very simple. It means that you become a victim that ends up being erased from history. You get erased from history. You don't exist anymore. Khalid Rashidi, the extraordinary scholar from Cambridge University, who's the founder of the Palestinian Project, who passed away 2 weeks ago. Anybody knows, a week ago? Allah yarhamu, he just passed very recently. Probably the single most intelligent person on modern new history, and just a luminary, like an unbelievable work that he spent his entire life working on that. His entire life was dedicated to ensure that the history of Palestine doesn't become a footnote and doesn't get erased from the memory and the conscience of the world. But the point is that it's not happening only to there, it's happening to everybody, steadily with time. I'm arguing, this is what I'm arguing, and this is why you should take this lecture and you should stay with the series until the end. That's your motivation. I'm arguing that the learning of the places of our shared scriptures is going to be the vaccine, the antidote against suffering from epistemicide and having your history erased from you. Does this make sense? That is the motivation. That's the reason for which we are studying this, and that's the reason for which we will do that. Now, the reason for which this is going to be very successful for us is because if you anchor that sacred history to the Quran, and the Quran is preserved by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by corollary, this is likely to be equally preserved. But if it was hanging on a thread that has no meaning, then the whole thing will become like a house of cards, and it will disappear. So the scriptures then end up sharing this common thing that is turning into a tug of war. I recently read about a Palestinian project for an entire community led by 2 professors from Gaza, who, for example, it was very, very interesting in the work that they have done, is that in mapping words like, in the Jewish tradition, words like the Holy Land and the Promised Land and all of these things, through historical records and archaeological records that did not come from the West, that the Promised Land could be Yemen. So what in God's name are we doing with a war there of a cosmic dimension? Why? It's because when history and the geography in which history get erased, then it becomes a free-for-all. Basically, everybody who has an opinion can put that opinion forward. And as a matter of fact, if you don't agree with that opinion, it will be forced on you, kind of, as an argument. So this is why it's very, very important. So the reason for which we must study this sacred geography with a multidisciplinary approach that takes into account religion, intellect, historical, and practical reasons will allow us to have a motivation where we can draw upon all of this scholarship and give authority to the sacred text to do that. So we are 2 minutes away, actually 1 minute away, and we haven't started the lecture. So this will be then my promise for next term. Why should we learn it? And it's hard to do, but we'll do it inshallah. I'll provide the answers. I have 5 answers. I will then get into how we put all of this together. The methodology I used uses exclusively Islamic sources. I don't use any source that is outside the Islamic heritage that is authentic. And then I'm going to start with Adam, and I will speak how Adam is situated, what's the definition of him in the Quran, the versions that existed about the history of putting him geographically located from Sri Lanka, all the way out to Mecca, all the way out to Taif, and some of the hadith of Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu that put some parts of his activity in the Sham. I'll put the map so you get a sense of what it is, where he ends up, some conclusion, and we'll go from there. So we're going to start here, inshallah, stop here, inshallah, for tonight, and now you know exactly what's going to happen for the next session, and the background would have already been taken into account, so we can kickstart directly from the next time and go there, inshallah. So I'll take 1 or 2 questions if there are any, and then invite you very strongly, now that you have seen the teaser, to be here next time, inshallah, on Friday, and then we can deep dive into the details. Yes?
So is there a way we can record this session? Because if we miss one, we miss the track.
Okay, so I have had this agonizing problem with the recording that creates laziness. So instead of people catching up, they start not attending, and then the entire experience goes away. So it's not my call. You can record if you want, but I very, very strongly encourage everyone to be present here, because when these questions come up, it really makes more sense. But I'm sure that the people who are organizing this.
The problem is, like, genuinely, I see here, brother, I don't see him here today. Brother Irfan, right? He missed a very important day today, right?
Right.
So tomorrow it may be May. So that was just wondering, right? Because if I can do it online, yes, it's easier, but if I can come personally, even better. But sometimes we found out when it is going on, especially in the summertime.
Right. Right. So I'll leave, inshallah, the logistics to you. Inshallah, you can do, inshallah, better qualified people than me, inshallah, for that. Yes, please.
So I know I'm getting a little bit ahead, but did they distinguish the places that we know are factual versus theological, I guess?
Yeah, I will get into this. It's an excellent question, and it is in fact one of the things that we'll forensically study. So what's going to happen is that on occasions you literally will have orthogonal conflicting reports. Somebody says it's black and somebody says it's white, and you're going to sort out what these two are. And there are tools. I'll speak about those and how we were able to reconcile some of them. And on other occasions, we're going to end up into some dicey territory because the information is quite scarce, and the filling of the gaps did take place, and as such what gets given to you becomes really in the eye of the beholder. you could rely on it, or you could question it, and both positions would be valid. And I will unpack all of this, inshallah, on a case-by-case basis. With Adam, it gets very thin because it's an origination story, so there isn't much controversy in terms of where he went and whatnot, and where he ended up being impacted his environment considerably. But boy, when we come to others later on in terms of their rich travel from one place to the other, this is going to become a very, very vital conversation in terms to end up finding what